Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. And what I want to talk about today is reduce. So this is the Array.reduce masterclass, where basically the idea is to get a really good understanding of reduce and how different ways we can use reduce. So first let's just kind of get the idea of like how the reduce function works, okay? Um, Now let's just do a node script. We'll just call this reduce.js. And my goal here is just really show you like actually write a fresh reduce function so you can kind of see like what would the reduce function look like under the hood. Okay, so if I were to write reduce from scratch, it would look like this. Function, we'll call it reduce, and basically it would take a couple different arguments. It would take in this case, this is going to be a little bit different than the array method, because the array method, it already knows what the array is, because it's a method of the array object. But in this case, it's just a freestanding function, so we would have to pass in the array. Okay, then we would pass in the callback, and then we would pass in the starting value. Okay, cool. And essentially what would want to happen is I would want to loop over the array, but I would want to start with like a counter. So we'll say like let a result equal the start value. Okay, so let equal start the start value, and then we would create the loop. And then we would do a standard loop. So for let index equals 0, as long as the index is less than or equal than, or actually just less than the array.length, then after each loop we will add 1 to the index. Okay, so there's our loop. Okay, and essentially what's going to happen is on each loop, we're going to change the value of result. We're going to say, hey, result equals whatever the result of the callback is. And again, you get to pass in a callback. We're going to call the callback passing in the result. Okay, passing in sort of like the actual, whatever the current running count is. Passing in the item, so that would be the array at the item, whatever the array is at the current index, and then we'll pass in the index itself. Okay. And essentially what's going to happen is that this loop's going to happen, and it's just going to keep modifying the result. And then when we're done, we return the result. So this is literally like the result, the reduce function laid out as its own standalone function. So now let's actually like test it out. So let me create an array. So we'll just say like console.log. I want to, let's say, find the sum of this array. So console.log, the result of reduce. And the array is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then the callback. Again, we're going to take the, which we usually refer to as the accumulator. So that's essentially what represents this. Like this result is really the accumulator. So the accumulator and the item in the array. I don't need the index. We're not going to worry about that right now. And we're always just going to return, hey, whatever the running total is plus the next item. And then we want this whole count to start at 0. Okay, so again, so this is the array, which again, when you're using it as an array method, we don't have to specify because it's a method of the array, so we can just use the this keyword under the hood. Okay, I can then, the callback is this, so I'm passing that in as the callback, and then I'm passing this in as the starting value, 0. Okay, so essentially this result is initially going to start at the value of 0, and then we're going to loop. So technically what it should do is on the first loop, result is 0, but it's going to add in 1 because the function always takes whatever the accumulator is plus the item. So again, on the first loop, so if I just like kind of typed in like the steps here, okay, and actually what we'll do is we'll console log that so we can actually see what's happening here. So I'm going to add a console.log here. Okay, so we're going to just say, I'm going to use backticks and say the accumulator is and the item is, okay, cool. And result is, and then I will just kind of do this callback again, just so we can kind of see what the result is. So you can kind of see like what happens on each loop. Okay, so essentially, if we run this node reduce.js, I made some error somewhere. Act is not defined. Oh yeah, because here it's technically result, and technically this should be our index, because there actually isn't a variable called act. So there we go. And then you can see what happens. So see, on the first loop, we start off with the starting value of 0. The first thing in the array is 1. So then when we do 0, and then the function returns the accumulator plus the item. So 0 plus 1 is 1. Then in the next round, the accumulator is, so basically whatever the result is of that round becomes the accumulator for the next round. So now the accumulator is 1, and the item is 2. So we add those together, we get 3. And you can kind of see like how this just kind of plays out. It just keeps accumulating. So that's the purpose of reduce. You're running this sort of cumulative process. Okay, but this is how reduce would look like if I created my own like standalone reduce function. But here's the thing, we can make this even easier because technically I don't need this reduce function that I just wrote. Reduce is already built into arrays. So any array has reduce built into it. So it becomes simpler. All I have to do is just do reduce. And instead of having to pass in the array, I just have to pass in the callback. And then just pass it in the starting value, 0. Okay, so 2 arguments instead of 1. Okay, and then there we go. I have reduced, and I can reduce this array. And I should get the same result. We're not going to get the logs, but I should still get 15. And there we go, 15. Okay. So that's essentially what reduce does. All it's doing is just saying, okay, hey, let's just keep running a tally of this cumulative operation. Okay, and you could do it to like add numbers or cumulatively, do math operations, which is fine. Other places where it can be useful is like piecing together like a string. So in a sense, like let's say I have something like this. Let's say here, console.log. I have this thing that's like, hello, I am a sentence. So I have this sentence, and what I would like to do is just like uppercase each word, okay, and turn it back into a string, okay. So what I can do is I can first turn the string into an array. So I'll just use the split function and say split it by each word, which would be a space, because that means the space is the splitter. So now I'm going to have an array of each word, okay, and then what I can do is I can then do dot reduce, and then we'll have the function. So again, we're going to have our callback, which we'll come back to in a second, and then our starting value will be an empty string because I'm going to rebuild the string, okay. And then we'll call, instead of calling it the accumulator, we'll just call it our string because that's eventually what it's going to become. So we'll call it stir, and then the word. Okay, so essentially what I'm going to be doing is that on each loop, starting with an empty string, I'm going to take the word. So I'm going to say like, word return word dot split because I want to uppercase the first letter. So we'll split it up into letters. I'm about to do this in a couple different steps. So we'll just say, hey, word uppercased const uppered equals word dot split. We split it into letters, and then I'm going to, okay, And then I'm going to take that array, take the first letter, which would be 0, and dot to uppercase. So that uppercase is the letter. And then what I can do is I can just return the result of uppered turned back into a string. So join and join it with that way it returns, it basically combines it into a word. Take the result of upper.join, add in a space because we want a space between each word. And then what this is going to do is essentially go through each word, uppercase it, and we end up with a string where each letter is uppercase. Okay, and I find reduce actually pretty useful for these kind of situations where you're working with a bunch of chunks of like a paragraph, let's say. Like let's say you do a regex and you have a bunch of chunks of a paragraph and you need to do a certain modification to certain parts. Like reduce, you can then like go say, okay, hey, take this chunk of the string, do these things, then add it back in. But let's just like see if this worked out the way I expected it to. Sentence. Why did it return just the word sentence? Oh, I see why. Because I didn't append it to the string. So I have to take the actual string and attach it to the uppercased word. Although again, we see here sentence wasn't uppercase, so that makes me concerned that we actually uppercasing the word upper dot join. Let's try it again. See what happens. So I'm getting hello, I am a sentence. So something's going wrong here. Hello, I am a sentence. I think this only returns, I'm going to assume that this only returns the uppercase letters. I'm going to try this. Upper 0 equals, let's try that. Yep, okay, that did the trick. So basically this looks like it doesn't mutate, so I have to go back and like actually assign it. Okay, so it's returning the uppercase letter, it's not changing the existing letter in the array. So then I have to make sure I assign the returned uppercase letter back into that spot in the array. Okay, well yes, we'll see, like that's one way, another way I can use reduce. I can use it to do cumulative string operations, not just cumulative numerical operations. And that can be really, really useful. Okay, yeah, that's generally going to be the two main use cases for reduce, but really honestly anything where basically you're taking sort of like a running tally and you're going to go through each thing in an array, but you're not getting a bunch of different an array of results. Instead, the end result should be one thing. You're reducing it to one value. That's generally going to want you're going to want to use array.reduce. So hopefully you guys found this useful and seeing like array.reduce at work. Just something to keep in mind, like just like for the signature of the callback is technically going to be the accumulator, which again in this case I called it stir. Previously I called it ack. Again, you can name the parameters in your functions whatever you want, but then it's going to be the item from the array or the value from the array. So in this case, like again, you don't see the array here, but the split created an array, and like hello was the first item in the array, I was the second item in the array, and again you can see that I did successfully uppercase everything over here. Okay, so second is the item in the array, and theoretically third is the index. And I think you can even go one more where you actually get the full array as a fourth argument. And then again, the return value would be whatever the accumulator becomes on the next round. Okay, but that's reduce. It's a tricky one to kind of appreciate at first, but once you see it and you see what it's used for, it's a super useful function. It can do a lot of stuff. So I'll leave it at that. Have a great day and enjoy.